Welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about struggles and celebrations that leaders and entrepreneurs experience on their journey to success. I'm your host, Christina, and I'm passionate about helping you achieve massive amounts of success at work and at home. We'll talk about all things people and organizational wellness, share relatable stories, and feature insightful guests because quality people and processes are at the heart of every success story. Ready to learn, grow, and have fun? Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Christina Schmidt. Happy New Year. It is January 2025 and my first episode of the year. So very exciting to get on with the new year and to get this started because there's always just some kind of an energy around January. If you listened to my last episode of the year last year, one of the last two episodes of the year last year, I talked a lot about how there isn't any magical thing around January 1st, and that was around resolutions. So keep that in mind. And I'm not talking about that there's a magic around January 1st, but there is an extra motivation, right? There's no magic that changes our human behaviors that's going to make us suddenly be able to change like that. We still have to set tiny goals, and we still have to be aware that behaviors take time to change, but there is an extra motivation to kickstart things. And there's always just a fun energy. And I'm still doing, probably a bit later than I would like to be, but I'm still doing my annual planning. So that's always very fun for me. And I do enjoy it. I think it's my discernment of my geniuses coming out. Today's episode, I'm going to talk about something that has to do a little bit with goals, but is slightly a different take on it, or might give you a new perspective on it. So to introduce the topic, I first want to talk through, I'm going to tell a story. When I was in the automotive industry, there were two words that I was always told to remove from my vocabulary, and you weren't allowed to really say them. And those words were try, like I'm going to try to do this, because you don't try, you're going to just do it, right? It's kind of Yoda-like, right? Do or do not, there is no try. The other one is hope. We don't hope for things. We don't hope that we will get the thing done, and we don't hope that we will accomplish the goal. But I want to dive into that a little bit because it becomes a bad word because people think of hope maybe differently than it should be. So hope is one of the three cardinal virtues of the Catholic faith, and it's something that we all have, but it's a virtue that we need to continue to work on. But it's something that in order to fully understand it, or in order to really work on it and get good or increase our levels in that virtue, we need to better understand it. So typically when we think of the word hope, it feels like a lot of times if you ask people to define it, it feels like a wish. It feels like, I hope I get it done. And it's like, well, you didn't really obviously make a plan if you're hoping. And I hope that we see each other later. So it feels a little like a lack of a plan. But hope, as it's defined and how it really should be taken, is actually a combination of a little bit of that wish feel, right? That feeling, but more, it's actually a trust. It's a trust in something larger than ourselves. It's a trust in God that He will save us. And also the work that goes into it. So when we talk about hope, we should think of it, and really all virtues are on a scale, but when we talk about hope, it's on a scale between despair and presumption. So it's smack dab in the middle. And you might say, well, it might feel weird. So let's talk through that. And let's get a good understanding of what that actually means. So let's talk first about despair. So despair comes typically when we're unsuccessful, right? We have failure after failure after failure, and we fall into despair. So when we have a complete reliance on ourselves, and we forget to trust in the Lord, and we forget to trust in something outside of ourselves and bigger than ourselves, that's when we can fall into despair with failure or with bad predicaments or with things that happen to us. And that's a lack of hope when we fall into that despair because we don't have the trust side of what's going on. On the other hand, presumption. So when we presume something will happen, we just assume it will happen without our effort, just because it's me or whatever it might be, but we assume it will happen. So it's a lack of working towards it. So I've talked about it before, but I had a lot of a reversion to my Catholic faith. So my whole career, so from the time that I started my career up until I was 35, 36, around that range, I had always been taught that it was this ownership thing. You have to own it. You have to take control of it. You have to want it. You got to work hard for it. And I did find a lot that when I would work at something, is I would just, I'd get worn out from it because I was working a lot, my frustrations and competencies, or I would get into this despair mode because I wasn't getting there. What that does to us is it makes us unsuccessful to our goals. It demotivates us, but it's that lack of hope. So when I moved into my Catholic faith, there was a lot of talk around trust in the Lord, put this in God's hands. He will take care of it. And I was like, that kind of feels opposite to everything I've been taught. And there's got to be an element of something that we do. So hope, this is hope, right? This is that balance between these two mindsets and ideologies. So in terms of the trusting in the Lord, we have to trust that there is a plan. We have to trust that if he puts an obstacle in front of us, it's for our good, or that we are going to overcome it and be better. So there is that part of it, but there's also we have to work, right? We have to do our parts of it. So we have to put our effort in and we have to try hard. So when we look at our goals, you can use this element of hope when setting your goals and also when you're in the middle of them and maybe struggling in some fashion. So let's talk first about how we put it into place when we set them from the get-go. So when you're setting your goals, the best thing is to actually sit down and plan a little bit. I know it's hard, isn't it? So we have this wonderful tool that we teach in our Thrive program. It's just a goal plan. So I can put that in the show notes as a link and you can go check that out. It's a fillable PDF or you can print it out and do it on paper. I kind of like the paper version, but it is very convenient to be able to type it in sometimes. But it has you think through what are the things that are going to get in the way, and also think through what are the things that are driving me our benefits. So those will help us, first of all, make plans around the struggles that we might hit, but it also helps us to engage some of our hope and maybe some of our trust, because what we can do and we can say, oh, you know what, my lack of motivation might get in the way, or my, failure might get in my way. It's a mindset thing, because sometimes we are our own worst enemies. We get in our own way more times than I think we realize. But we can make a plan around there and we can say, one of my actions is I'm going to schedule some time to reflect on the goal, to pray with the goal, or to sit in that wonder part of the goal, even in the middle of it. So when you're in the middle, just sitting there thinking through, okay, you know what? This still all makes sense. I'm struggling here, but that's, I should do this, this, and this. So just taking the time for reflection or prayer, because sometimes we put it all on ourselves and it's a very heavy weight to carry. But what it does is we hit a lot of failures. We start to fall into that despair. So that time to reflect, that purposeful time to think through it, can let us be open to maybe something needs to change. And maybe it's the goal that needs to change. Maybe it's our team that needs to change in terms of who's doing what or who's helping you. Or maybe it's it's just a tweak that needs to be made, or maybe it's a challenge that you need to overcome. But regardless, you need to have that time scheduled in. And so if you're halfway through some goal and you haven't scheduled it in, it's not too late. You still can, but it is a very useful thing to think through in advance, like, once a week, once a month, once a day, whatever it might be, depending on the length of the goal, I'm going to have some reflection time. So it's good. So you can use that in the planning. The other side of it that you can use in the planning, if you have a tendency to fall into, I wrote it down, so what's going to happen, sort of goal setting mentality, you can make sure when you're doing your plan, and this is also on the goal plan, that when you're doing it, you set very small actions that are mini goals within the plan, because that is highly motivating for people. Having success and getting to go check mark is motivating to everybody, even if you have a low tenacity level. And sometimes it's more important for people who have low tenacity because they need to complete to move forward, right? They need to, when it feels like this big animal, this big elephant to eat, right? Then it's too much. And then it's almost demotivating because it just feels like this crazy thing that they couldn't possibly finish or get done. So there is a level of that needing to take those small goals. So when you're setting your goals, you can create your plan like that. So now let's talk through if we're struggling with our goals, because inevitably we're going to hit roadblocks. We cannot control everything. Circumstances will change. So what can we do when we're, 3 months into a 6-month goal, 3 months into a 12-month goal, and we're saying, oh my gosh, I'm stuck, or I haven't started, or whatever it might be, but you're struggling in some fashion. Maybe the targets aren't, or the metrics aren't being hit. You can say, okay, if I feel like I'm in that despair mode, right? It's the same thing. You start adding in that reflection time and start saying, okay, I trust that I'm going to be put in the right circumstance. I trust that this is going to work out. So you can start to trust in the Lord, or that He will guide you away from that goal if that's what needs to happen. When we get stuck in the I have to complete the goal because I set it sort of mode, we're going to end up working on things that we shouldn't work on anymore. Because you know what? Maybe the circumstances have changed. Like maybe things, go back to 2020. We all had goals that year, but when March 2020 hit, everything changed. Our financial goals changed. Our production goals changed. Our goals of how we spent our time started to have to change. So everything changed. And if we put ourselves into that, I have to get it done, I have to meet these sales targets, I have to meet these production targets, circumstances were different. So maybe some of them had to stay the same. Maybe that made sense, but probably a lot of them needed to shift or pivot, all of our favorite word from that time. So that's one side. But the other side, when you're finding yourself into that, moving towards that presumptive or being demotivated in some fashion, like setting those small goals again. So taking that time to rethink, how big is this elephant I want to chew? And how do I motivate myself? How do I get myself doing the work again? So those are two ways to really have a look at it. But that important time to schedule in is that reflection time on it to figure out where am I sitting on here. So to wrap it all up, we're going to have a short one this week. So you're welcome. I know January is always crazy busy, but kind of exciting at the same time. But to wrap it all up, when you're setting goals, hope is not a bad word anymore, because hope is not a wish. Hope is not the goal. Hope is trust and hard work. So trust in the big picture, trust in something outside of ourselves. We're not in the total control, right? So trust in that and the hard work in doing our part. So I hope for you that you can incorporate some hope into your goals this year. And if you liked this episode, as always, I hope I hope that you will share it with a friend, that you will subscribe, that you'll like the video if you're watching on YouTube, and subscribe to the channel. Leave me a comment. Go in and leave me a review. Tell me what you think of the podcast. Tell me what you think of this episode, or pick your favorite episode and let me know how it is. So I hope all of the best for you in 2025, and I will see you on the next episode of the Business Building Blocks podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Business Building Blocks podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. If you found value in our conversation, please leave a quick review, like, or share. It helps us reach more amazing listeners like you. For more resources and insights, visit ChristinaSchmidt.ca, where you can find tools and support to empower your leadership journey. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.